of action.
We're with Mr. Louis Gorenflo right now. His father witnessed the death of A. Baldwin Wood aboard the Nydia, and he also saved the Nydia from destruction. Mr. Gorenflo, if you could tell us that story.
My father was out on the Sound in his boat, the Sailfish, which incidentally was designed by him and built right here in Biloxi, and my dad was the owner-operator from 1955 to 1963. So he made 2 tours a day out there, and he often saw Mr. Woods, and they would wave to one another and honk the horn at one another in a greeting. And he was out there on the Sound one day, and so was Mr. Baldwin Woods with his beloved Nydia. And Daddy noticed that after he waved, he slowly sank to his knees. And then he crumpled onto the cabin floor of the Nydia. And at that point, the sails filled completely, and the boat went in the direction of a pier with heavy pilings. As my father described it, with a bone in its teeth. It was really running. And aboard the boat that time was a expert sailor by the name of Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe was a great sailor. And Daddy put him on board the Nydia, and he brought her around into the wind. And the boat was saved. It came within like 5 feet of hitting the pilings, and as fast as it was going, it would have been sure destruction for the Nydia. And thank God for that. It didn't happen.
Tell us how your father became acquainted with Baldwin Wood in the first place.
It's a great story. In 1954, my father brought home a collie puppy, male collie puppy, and named Ricky. And as the dog matured, my dad would take him down to the beach. And the dog picked out a certain spot on the beach that he really liked. There was some grass growing there. The water was shallow. The bottom was sandy. He was in dog heaven. And my father also knew something about riparian rights, which means that if you own property facing the water, then you have the rights to that property to the high water mark. So my father, knowing that, decided that it would be a smart thing to do. And he would take Ricky and go visit Mr. Baldwin Wood and ask for his permission to be on Mr. Baldwin Wood's beach. And so off they went. He knocked on the door, and he introduced himself. They both knew about each other, but they didn't know each other until that time. And so they got acquainted, and over time they had a lot of discussions about boats and building boats. And of course he was an engineer and my dad was an engineer, and they had a lot in common. They both loved the water, they both loved boats, they both loved Biloxi, they loved the sea. So it built a very strong bond between these two men, and it existed until Mr. Baldwin Woods died aboard the Lydia. He had talked to my father about immortality, and he had said to my father, I have only one wish left in life, and that is, I want to die aboard the Lydia. And God gave him his prayers, wish. He died aboard the Nydia. And my father mourned, as most people in Biloxi did, all the way to New Orleans and all the way along the coast, mourned his death, because he was a great Biloxian, he was a great Mississippian, he was a great citizen of the United States. And he did a lot for the city of New Orleans in the designing of pumps to pull out the water, because the city of New Orleans is below the water level of the Mississippi River. So, as it turned out, they didn't have a very long friendship, but it was very deep and very committed to one another.
You actually met Mr. Wood?
I'm sorry?
You met Mr. Wood?
Never did. Never did. I knew about him. We'd pass by his house. We'd always look for him to see if he was out in the yard. And finally I got the idea that you can tell where a rich person lives because they're never out in the yard. I never saw him. I never met him, and that was a shame. I never got an opportunity. I never asked my dad to introduce me because I thought that would be an intrusion on their friendship. And so the time passed. And I admired his work and his work record, and the things that he had done are fantastic, but never met him in person.
Did you see activity around the house, like the cars, the people working there, the horses?
No, I never saw any of that. I never got behind the gate.
I see.
I was an observer. I was particularly fascinated with the lighthouse, to tell you the truth. And the lighthouse was built by Mr. Baldwin Wood for one and one purpose only. He had a 500,000 candle power searchlight in that lighthouse, and it was trained on the Nydia, and the Nydia alone, which was anchored and tied out, say, I don't know, 50, 100 yards off the beach. There was no pier connecting it or anything. He had to use a little boat to get from the Nydia to the shore. And he loved that boat. He loved that boat, and he told my father he loved that boat more than he loved his life itself.
Did you ever hear of the Nydia being stolen by convicts at one point?
No, I'd never heard that.
We found that story at one point. It's interesting. We're trying to verify that.
No, can't help you on that one. I can invent something real quick. But
Okay, to go back though, you mentioned the sailfish. Your family still has, the sailfish is still operating, working,
the
isn't it?
sailfish is still operating and running, and I'll tell you this, it has the same diesel engine in it that it did when Dad first got into operation in 1955. That's phenomenal, I think. It speaks to the care that he's taken with the diesel engine, and the care that subsequent owners have lavished on the diesel engine. They've had to make some repairs to the boat, and that was done recently. And I talked to the boat owner operator, I don't know, well, maybe 3 months ago, and he told me about up in the forward section of the boat, they had to cut out some wood and replace timbers. But there it is, looking as good as new.
Why don't you tell us just a little bit quickly about yourself and your history in the military and the Navy?
I took a test. This was before there were such things as a SAT test or an ACT. The Navy had its own test. So I went over to New Orleans to take the test. And they called me back to take the physical. And I was a full 5'6" tall and a threatening bull of 120 pounds. And I met the bare qualifications physically. Then I remember one of the guys that had handling the physicals decided he would ask the doctor, and I'm standing there, I'm pushing my chest out as far as I can, trying to look as big as I could. And the doctor said, thank God, he said, he'll grow. He's all right, there's nothing wrong with him, he's not physically fit. So I got this, I was awarded the scholarship to the University of Mississippi. And it was a great scholarship because it paid for books, it paid for all the college cost, It paid for a dormitory, and they gave us $50 a month to be able to buy meals. So, you know, we wouldn't get anything elaborate to eat very often, but
Sure.
nevertheless, I think it was a good deal. It was a really good deal.
How was our sound? That was a lot of noise before, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Gorenflo, if you don't mind, tell us that story once again, if you don't mind. Your father and the circumstance with seeing Baldwin Wood die.
And there's another one, you know, right there. It's not quite as bad as the first one, but if you wouldn't mind just giving us the story again, you know, about the relationship, how they met, and
Well, what you said was wonderful, but we had the boat making so much noise
I got
behind you.
Gotcha. The meeting between my father and Mr. Wood was occasioned by the fact that we had a collie dog, and that dog loved the beach. And he loved the sand, and he loved the water, and the beach there had a sandy bottom, and so the dog liked that. And my father knew about riparian rights, which means that if you own property facing the water, you have rights to that property to the high water mark. So he thought it would be appropriate for himself to go over to Mr. Wood's, cross over the highway and go over to Mr. Wood's house, knock on the door, bring the dog for proof.
Introduce Ricky.
Yeah, Ricky was with him. And explained to him that the dog had chosen this, carefully chosen this part of the beach as his own personal playground. And Dad would bring him there after work. And Mr. Wood just was absolutely thrilled that my dad came, because they knew of each other, but they didn't ever get formally introduced. So it was a chance meeting, and my dad took the most of it, and he sought out Mr. Woods a number of times after that, and just to chat with him and to get to know him better and to understand him better and to listen to Mr. Wood talk about all of the things that he had done in his lifetime, which was absolutely monumental. So that's how they met, and the collie dog brought them together there, and my dad got the idea that the riparian rights should not be crossed up in any manner by himself, or Ricky for that matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, could you tell us one more time also about your father seeing the Nydia and seeing Baldwin Wood die there?
Okay. My father on the sailfish was making 2 trips a day, and this was, I believe it was the morning trip that he made here. And Dad was out on the Mississippi Sound as well as Mr. Wood in the Nydia. And they had fashioned a greeting, which was a hand wave and then a return hand wave and a honk on the horn. And this was kind of a big deal to both of them. I mean, they loved to do it, and they loved to see each other smile. And one day, he had waved to Mr. Woods, and Mr. Woods had waved back. And then he was standing behind his steering wheel, and he began to sink. And he just slowly holding on to the steering wheel, he sank till he got to his knees, and then he crumpled and lay on the deck of the Nydia. My father then, watching the Nydia, saw that the line, the halyards were loosed and the sails were filled, and the Nydia was off to the races, out to sea. And as Dad looked around, he saw the pier that was out there also, and the Nydia was headed straight for the pier. So he put Uncle Joe Uncle Joe Nikovich, he put him, who's an expert sailor, he put him on board after he caught up with it, chased it for a good length of time, because the Sailfish was not noted as a speedboat. It was a slow-moving dude and a comfortable boat. But he caught up with it and put Mr. Nikovich aboard, and he brought her into the wind and brought her to a standstill. And I like to think that, as my father wrote, that was his farewell wave. It was not his hello greeting. It was his farewell wave. He probably didn't know that, but that's what it turned out to be. And my dad described it as a final benediction to thank the Lord for all the blessings that he had, and for his answered prayer that he would die aboard the Nydia. He loved that boat, as he said, more than life itself. It's easy to understand.
And your father heard him say that?
Yes, my father heard him say that. And they got to be, the conversations that they had drifted off into conversations having to do with mortality and immortality. And my father had a strep throat when he was about 18. The strep throat went to rheumatic fever. The rheumatic fever damaged his heart, and his heart was enlarged. So he knew his days were numbered. And at age 33, they told him he had 6 months to live. He, of course, ignored that and went on to live life as he would anyway, which was, he was a careful man with what he ate. He didn't drink. He smoked a pipe, not cigarettes. And typical of a sea captain, you have to smoke a pipe. And he was in the best of health of any man I've ever seen, with the exception of his heart. He was never sick, never in the hospital, never had a cold. He was a horse, and he was a horse. And he was a healthy horse, too, and he was a great horse. I love my father. I just loved him so dearly.
What age did he pass away?
He was 58.
He did better than that 33-year projection.
He did. He did. He did.
He had a wonderful description for the Nydia when you saw her running. Tell us about that.
He said the Nydia on that particular day, when Mr. Wood actually did his final benediction and crumpled on the deck, the wind filled the sails, and it ran. The Nydia ran like a dog with a bone in its teeth, which is an old-timer's expression around Biloxi. And my dad knew he was in for it to try to catch it. And God willing, he did, and put Mr. Nikovich aboard. But that must have been a sight to see. A sight to see.
It took him a half mile to do it.
It took him a half mile to do it. And as my father said, the Nydia was carrying its precious cargo out to sea. Like, you can't have him yet. As my dad said, when a piece of lumber is simply a piece of lumber, it's inanimate. But when a piece of lumber is put into a boat, it has a soul. So the Lydia had a soul. And that soul was part of the gift that that boat gave to her owner over many years.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Daryl, do you have any other questions we need to cover?
On the part about when he crumpled, you said he reached for the wheel. He actually had a tiller, not a wheel. And I wonder, did we get it before without that, the wheel part? Or do we need to go back and just that little bit when he saw him, they had
What he's referring to is
I know what you're talking about.
you might just that one little bit,
Okay.
we could do a little edit, just
Yeah.
when he fell
Yeah.
and kneeled on
Okay.
the tiller.
Okay. Mr. Wood exchanged a wave. And he thought it was a wave of hello. He never knew it was a wave of goodbye. And that's what it was, a wave of goodbye. As he turned toward the tiller, he began to struggle to stand up. And he began to sink. And he sank to his knees. And then he crumpled and was on the deck of his beloved Nydia in a final embrace.
That gives us a nice edit right there.
Yep. That was it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That was
My
great.
pleasure.
Really great.
Anytime,
Well,
anytime I can
especially
talk about Mr. Bowenwood, my father, and my dog.
Ricky.